Rome was never truly silent. In the wavering glow of oil lamps, inside a banquet room built to display power, a single trembling hand could shatter the illusion of order. For the men reclining on fine cushions, it was only a fallen cup, a brief interruption in an evening of comfort. But for the servant standing behind the light, it could mean something far greater: fear, punishment, the fragile edge between survival and ruin. Then dawn rises over Rome in the year 117 CE, and the true scale of this world comes into view. This is the heart of an empire at its height, a city of monuments, marble, and conquest, where triumph towers above streets already filling with smoke, footsteps, and labor. Beneath that grandeur, another machine begins to move. Behind heavy wooden doors, unseen hands sweep the floors, prepare the lamps, polish the silver, and ready the household before its masters ever appear, every morning. In Rome, luxury did not stand on stone alone. It stood on human lives forced into silence. In a Roman house, power announced itself without noise. It was there in the polished silver, in the straightened stools, in the doors opened before sunrise, in the perfection demanded from hands that would never be named. At the center sat the master, calm and distant, while the life of the household moved through corridors most guests would never see. Narrow passages, smoking kitchens, damp stone floors, and servants who passed like shadows between one command and the next. Daphnis was one of them, standing at the edge of the light, present in every ritual, yet belonging to none of it. And somewhere beneath that discipline, another world still survived. Before Rome, before the silence, there had been a smaller life, far from marble and empire. Dry hills, a poor family, the ordinary rhythm of labor and hunger. A childhood measured by survival rather than ambition. Then came the port, the counting of goods, the scratching of names into wax. In Rome, even memory could be turned into property. By the time Daphnis entered the markets of Rome, his fate no longer belonged to him. Beneath the hard white glare of midday, among traders, brokers, and watchful buyers, human lives were measured with the same cold indifference as cargo unloaded from distant shores. No trumpet marked the moment. No law spoke in his defense. Everything happened in silence, through gestures, glances, and the efficient calculations of men deciding where a body might serve best. Then came the quieter violence that followed. Hair cut shorter, old garments removed from memory, a rough new tunic waiting on a bench, and the first walk through the narrow service passages of a house that would become both shelter and prison. Marble atriums, smoke-dark kitchens, storerooms heavy with oil and grain, dining rooms prepared for the pleasure of others. This was the map of his new world. And by the time memory released him, the boy who arrived was already gone. In his place stood a servant shaped by routine, obedience, and the discipline of learning how not to be seen. Before the city had fully opened its eyes, Daphnis was already awake. In a Roman house like this, dawn did not begin with sunlight, but with obedience. He rose from a narrow sleeping space, washed in cold water, swallowed a crust of bread too quickly to call it a meal, and stepped into the machinery of the household long before the master appeared. Every motion demanded precision. Shutters opened to the morning air, water carried through dim corridors, silver polished until it reflected a world he could never enter. Garments laid out for a man whose comfort depended on hands he would scarcely notice. At the great entrance, clients began to arrive, and the house shifted into yet another ritual of Roman power. Daphnis stood beside the columns with lowered eyes, waiting for the smallest signal from the steward. In Rome, a servant's life was built not from glory or choice, but from readiness, silence, and the exhausting discipline of being present in every moment, yet never truly seen. Before the empire ruled the world, it ruled the home. By mid-morning, the city itself had become part of Daphnis's labor. Sent into the streets with basket and coin, he moved through Rome not as a citizen of its greatness, but as one more unseen body carrying that greatness forward. The markets throbbed with life, fish glistening on wet boards, herbs crushed beneath hurried hands, bread still warm from the ovens, merchants weighing hunger against profit in the heat of the day. He returned through the side entrance with amphorae, provisions, and the dust of the streets still clinging to his sandals, vanishing again into the service quarters where the true work of the household never slowed. In the kitchen, flames hissed, blades struck wood, grain was crushed, orders were counted, and every object passed through disciplined hands before it could reach the master's table. Even the smallest action carried weight. A folded cloth, a sealed message, a basin offered at the exact moment. This was how Roman power endured each day. Here, service was the hidden machinery beneath Roman power itself, too. By noon, fatigue had already settled deep into Daphnis's bones, yet the day was only tightening its grip. In the few moments allowed to him, he ate quickly in the heat of the kitchen, swallowing barley and bread almost without tasting them before labor called him onward again. Beyond the walls, the sun burned white over the courtyards and rooftops of Rome. But inside the house, another transformation had already begun. Linen was shaken free of dust, lamps were checked and filled, couches were adjusted, silver polished to a mirror sheen, and every surface prepared for the night to come. As daylight slowly withdrew, the domus changed its face. What had been a place of hidden work by morning became a stage of display by evening. Smoke thickened over the hearth, meat hissed above the coals, and the triclinium waited in perfect order. In Rome, a banquet was never merely a meal. It was ritual, hierarchy, spectacle, and power made visible in firelight, arranged to remind every guest exactly who commanded the room. When night finally fell, the house became a theater of power. Lamps glowed against polished silver, wine darkened in the cups, and the guests reclined as though comfort were the natural order of the world. But for Daphnis, this was the most dangerous hour of the day. In such rooms, a servant had to be visible and invisible at once, close enough to answer every need, yet never so present that he disturbed the illusion. One mistake was enough. A slip of the hand, a cup striking stone, red wine spilling across pale fabric, and suddenly the rhythm of the banquet froze. The music faltered, eyes turned. Shame moved faster than sound. For the men at the table, it was only a moment's disruption. For Daphnis, it was the sharp reminder that a servant's body was never fully his own, but always exposed to judgment, anger, and fear. And yet, the meal continued. The wine was poured again, the lamps still burned, and he returned to the room as though nothing had happened. In Rome, even humiliation had to be swallowed in silence, and service had to continue before the echo was gone. The night stretched long, and the banquet continued. The laughter of guests mingled with the clinking of cups and the rustle of togas. Daphnis moved through the room with careful precision, his every step calculated to avoid attention. But even in these moments, the weight of his service was undeniable. His existence was defined by these rituals, the endless cycle of serving, observing, and staying in the shadows. The food, the wine, the luxury, it was all for those who sat at the table, while the labor was his. And in the silent space between serving each course, he was reminded that in Rome, his value was measured by his silence, by his invisibility. The work was never finished. Even after the guests had left, the lamps extinguished, and the triclinium cleared, there was still more to be done. The remnants of the feast, the discarded food and drink, were cleared away. The house returned to its pristine state, and Daphnis returned to his narrow quarters, his body aching, his mind still alert, waiting for another day to begin. As the morning sun crept over the horizon, Daphnis awoke once again, not with the luxury of rest, but with the weight of another day. The cold stone of his narrow sleeping space greeted him, as it always did. His body, familiar with the rhythm of the life he was forced to live, moved mechanically through the morning ritual, rolling the blanket, checking the small space for order, and stepping into another long, repetitive day. There was no room for rest, no time to breathe freely. The work of Rome was not just seen in the public theaters of politics or war. It existed in the corners of every home, in every task done by men like him. The polished silver, the sweeping marble, the meals set out for the elite, they were all made possible by those who would never be seen. Daphnis's life, like countless others, was bound to the invisible labor that fueled the empire. With each passing day, the weight of that responsibility became heavier. His name faded further. And yet, Rome continued to thrive on the very sacrifices he made.